There's a man standing at the edge of the world, not the world as you know it, not concrete and glass and the low hum of traffic, the world as it was before all of that, before cities, before borders, before the long, slow accumulation of everything human beings have built to feel less alone. He is standing at the entrance to a garden. And here's what the text says about that garden. It says there's gold there, and not ordinary gold, but gold described as good, which is the same word used in Genesis 1 when God looks at everything he made and calls it good. There is a river that splits into 4 heads and waters the whole earth. There is bdellium, a translucent pearl-like resin. There is onyx stone. There are trees unlike anything that has grown before or since, one of them bearing fruit that gives life, one of them bearing fruit that gives the knowledge of everything. And there is God, walking in the cool of the day, the way you walk through a place you love. Now, here is the question that almost nobody asks. Here's the thing that sits just underneath the surface of those first 3 chapters of Genesis, waiting for someone to notice it. What exactly was this place? Because for most of your life, if you grew up in a church or a Sunday school or a household where the Bible was read, you were given one answer. Eden was a garden, a paradise, the original home of the first human beings, a place of innocence and beauty that was lost when Adam and Eve made the wrong choice, and that we have been mourning ever since. That is not wrong, but it is. And I want you to hold this thought carefully. It is only the surface of the story. There is a layer underneath a layer that the original Hebrew audience would have felt in their bones the moment the text was read aloud to them. A layer that connects Eden not just to the beginning of the Bible, but to the end of it. A layer that turns this ancient garden into something so large, so structurally important, that once you see it, you cannot read a single page of scripture the same way again. Here's what most people miss. Eden was not just a garden. In the cosmological imagination of the ancient Near East, the world in which Moses wrote, the world in which the first audiences heard this story, a garden like this meant one specific thing. It meant a temple. It meant the dwelling place of God on earth. And that changes everything. Before we go further, I want to plant one image in your mind, one detail from the end of Genesis chapter 3 that we are going to come back to. After Adam and Eve are sent out of the garden, God places at the entrance, at the east side of the garden, 2 cherubim and a flaming sword that turns in every direction, a sword that never stops moving, a sword that guards the way back to the tree of life. We're going to come back to that sword, I promise you, but not yet. Let's start with the Hebrew. The word translated garden in Genesis 2 is gan, and yes, it means garden. But when you look at where this word appears in the ancient Near Eastern world, in the royal gardens of Mesopotamian kings, in the sacred precincts surrounding Babylonian temples, you begin to see that a gan was never just a place where things grew. A royal garden in the ancient world was attached to the temple. It was the outer court of the sacred precinct. It was the place where heaven and earth were understood to overlap. The Mesopotamians had a concept older than Abraham, older than Moses, of a cosmic mountain, a sacred garden, a place at the center of the earth where the gods dwelled, and from which the rivers of the world flowed outward. The rivers gave life. The garden was the source, and the garden was guarded. Sound familiar? Now stay with me, because this is where the text begins to do something remarkable. In the ancient tabernacle, the portable sanctuary that God instructs Moses to build in the wilderness, there are 3 sections: the outer court, the holy place, the most holy place, the inner room where God's presence dwells. And when you walk through those 3 sections, You are walking from the edge of the sacred inward toward the center, inward toward God. In the ancient temple that Solomon builds in Jerusalem, the structure that takes the tabernacle's design and builds it in stone and cedar, the same three-part structure appears, and both structures share a detail that most people walk right past. Both of them face east. The entrance to the tabernacle faces east. The entrance to Solomon's temple faces east. When the morning sun rises, it rises directly into the doorway of the sanctuary. Genesis 3:24, after the exile, says that God placed the cherubim at the east side of the garden. The entrance to Eden faces east. Now look at the decorations inside Solomon's temple. The walls of the inner rooms are carved with open flowers, palm trees, and cherubim. The ceiling is cedar. The floor is cypress. The whole structure is meant to feel like you are standing inside a living garden, like you are standing in Eden. The priest who served in that temple, who read these descriptions in Exodus and Kings and Ezekiel, they would have made this connection immediately. The temple was not just a building. The temple was a rebuilt Eden, a reopened door to the presence of God. But it gets stranger. Go back to Genesis 2 and look at what God tells Adam to do in the garden. The text says, God placed the man in the garden to abide it and to shamar it. Those two Hebrew words are typically translated to work it and keep it. Simple enough. A man tending his garden. Except those exact two words, abad and shamar, appear together in only one other context in all of the Hebrew Bible. Numbers 3:7-8, where they describe the duties of the Levitical priest serving in the tabernacle. To abide, to minister, to serve, to shamar, to guard, to keep watch. Adam was not given a gardening job. Adam was given a priestly assignment. He was placed in the sanctuary of God, not as a tenant, not as a visitor, but as a priest guardian. His calling was to serve in the presence of God and to protect the sacred space from anything that would defile it. And this is where it gets remarkable, because it means that what happened next, the conversation with the serpent, the fruit, the eating, was not just a personal failure. It was a priestly failure. Adam abandoned his post. He failed to guard the sanctuary. He let the corruption in. And the consequence was not just exile from a beautiful place. It was removal from the presence of God. Now we need to talk about the serpent, because the serpent is one of the most misunderstood figures in all of Scripture. And the misunderstanding begins at the very first word used to describe him. The Hebrew word is nakash. And yes, it means serpent. But nakash, in its adjective form, means shining one, a being of radiant supernatural light. And in Ezekiel 28, the prophet delivers an oracle against the king of Tyre that suddenly shifts mid-speech into something that cannot possibly be describing a human king anymore. Listen to what Ezekiel says. He says this figure was in Eden, the garden of God. He says every precious stone adorned him: ruby, topaz, emerald, chrysolite, onyx, jasper, lapis lazuli, turquoise, and beryl. He says this creature was anointed as a guardian cherub. He walked among the fiery stones. He was on the holy mountain of God. He was beautiful. He was powerful. He was a guardian of the sanctuary. And then pride, corruption, violence. He was driven out. The Nakash who approaches Eve in the garden is not a simple talking snake that God left lying around Eden. He is a fallen guardian, a once radiant being who had already been removed from his position among the fiery stones, who comes now to do to the human priest what pride had done to him. He comes to separate them from God. Pay attention to how he does it. He does not come with force. He comes with a question. Did God really say? 3 words of doubt, half a sentence, And the doubt grows until Eve looks at the fruit. The text says she sees that it is good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable for gaining wisdom. And she takes it and gives it to Adam, who is with her. Adam is there. He hears the entire conversation. He watches, and he says nothing. He does not guard. He does not protect. He does not exercise his priestly calling. He takes the fruit from his wife's hand and he eats it. And Josephus, the first century Jewish historian who recorded the traditions and interpretations that surrounded these texts, writes in his Antiquities of the Jews that Adam's failure was understood not merely as disobedience, but as a kind of abdication. A man who had been given a sacred stewardship and surrendered it. Here's the part nobody tells you. After the fall, God comes walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and he calls out. And this is one of the most haunting lines in all of Scripture. He calls out, "Where are you?" This is not a question of geography. God knows where Adam is hiding. This is a question of vocation, of calling, of identity. Where are you, priest? Where are you, guardian? Where are you, the one I placed here to stand in my presence and keep this place holy? And Adam answers from behind a tree. He is hiding from the God who used to walk with him in the evenings. He is covering himself with fig leaves, a desperate, inadequate attempt to deal with the shame that no leaf was ever made to carry. He is afraid. He is exposed. He is somewhere he was never meant to be, outside the circle of God's warmth, behind the bark of a tree, listening to footsteps he used to run toward. This is what sin does. It does not just break a rule, it breaks a relationship. It turns the presence of God, the most beautiful thing in the created world, into something terrifying, something you hide from. And now the exile must come. Genesis 3:22-24 is one of the most theologically dense passages in the entire Bible. 3 verses, and most people read past them to get to the genealogies. God says the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, and now he might reach out and take from the tree of life and eat and live forever. And so, and this is important, God does not expel Adam and Eve because he is angry, or rather, not only because he is angry, he expels them because to eat from the tree of life in their current state, carrying sin, carrying separation, carrying shame, would be to lock them in that broken condition forever. The exile is, in a strange and painful way, an act of mercy. God sends them out. And then he does something tender and terrible at the same time. The text says the Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. Garments of skin. Something died to cover their shame. Before the law, before the sacrificial system, before the temple with its altars and its daily offerings, something bled in the garden. And its covering was given to the people who had failed. You are watching the shadow of an altar being cast backwards through time. And then God places at the east entrance to the garden, at the gate of the sanctuary, the cherubim and the flaming sword. In the ancient temple, the boundary between the outer court and the inner sanctuary was guarded, not by soldiers, but by symbol and by law. The book of Numbers records that any unauthorized person who came near the sanctuary, who crossed the threshold they were not permitted to cross, would be put to death. The boundary between ordinary space and holy space was absolute. The flaming sword that turns in every direction is not a weapon of punishment. It is the guardian of the threshold. It marks the place where the exiled priests used to stand and the place they can no longer enter. The whole architecture of the Hebrew world is now oriented around this one loss. The tabernacle in the wilderness is a portable Eden, a tent sanctuary where the presence of God dwells, behind a veil, attended by priests who burn incense and offer blood, drawing as close to the center as the law allows. Every element points backward toward the garden and forward toward something not yet revealed. The temple in Jerusalem is an Eden in stone. Josephus writes in meticulous detail about the carvings and the materials, the gold, the wood, the engraved flowers and palm trees. And what he is describing, without quite naming it, is an architectural memory of the garden, a building that says, "This is where God used to live with us. This is how close we used to stand." And here is the pattern that runs beneath all of it. From the garden to the tabernacle, to the temple, to the synagogue, to every church that has ever been built in a village or a city or a jungle clearing. Human beings keep building places to get back to what was lost. Keep building structures to stand near the presence they were exiled from. Keep reaching across the gap toward the God who used to walk with them in the evening. There's one more thing. The prophets see it. Isaiah, in chapter 51, speaks of God making the wilderness like Eden, the desert like the garden of the Lord. Ezekiel, in chapter 36, says God will make the ruined land like the Garden of Eden. Joel sees Eden as both the past and the standard by which desolation is measured. Eden is not just the past. In the prophetic imagination, Eden is the future. Something is coming. Something that will reopen what was closed. Something that will deal with the sword. Now watch what happens next. The Gospels are written for an audience steeped in this imagery. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. They are writing for people who know their Hebrew Bible, who have prayed toward Jerusalem, who have stood in the outer courts of Herod's temple and looked toward the veil that separated them from the most holy place. They are writing for people who know what it means to be outside the garden. And so when the story of Jesus reaches its hinge point, the night before his death, notice where the gospel writers place him. A garden. John chapter 18, verse 1. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Gethsemane, which in Hebrew means oil press. A garden on the slopes of the Mount of Olives, just outside Jerusalem. The first Adam stood in a garden and was given a choice. He chose himself over God, and the garden was lost. The second Adam, and Paul calls Jesus this explicitly in Romans 5 and 1 Corinthians 15. The second Adam kneels in a garden, and the text says he is in agony. His sweat is like drops of blood falling to the ground, and he prays, "Not my will, but yours." Where the first Adam reached for the fruit that was not his to take, the second Adam opens his hands and surrenders the cup he did not want to drink. Where the first Adam hid from God, the second Adam presses his face toward God in the darkest hour of his life. This is not a coincidence the gospel writer stumbled into. This is architecture. This is a story being told with full awareness of what it echoes. And it does not stop there. Jesus is buried in a garden. John chapter 19, verse 41. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden, a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. A new tomb in a garden. And then, and I need you to feel the weight of this, on the morning of the resurrection, Mary Magdalene comes to the tomb while it is still dark. She finds it empty. She is weeping. She turns around and sees someone standing there. She thinks he is the gardener. John tells us this detail as if it is almost a mistake, as if Mary simply did not recognize Jesus in the early morning light. But John is the most intentional writer in the New Testament. He does not include details by accident. He is telling you something. The one who comes walking through the garden in the morning, the one who speaks her name and is recognized, is, in the deepest sense of the word, exactly what she thought he was. He is the gardener, the one who tends the garden of God, the one who reopens what was closed, the one who walks among his people in the cool of the day, the way his father once did in Eden. Revelation is the last book of the Bible, and most people approach it as a puzzle, a code to crack, a timeline to map, a series of frightening images to decode. But if you have been with us through everything we have covered today, the garden, the temple, the exile, the cherubim, the sword, then Revelation is not a puzzle. Revelation is a homecoming. In the final two chapters, Revelation 21 and 22, John the Apostle describes his vision of the new creation. And the imagery is unmistakable to anyone who has read Genesis with open eyes. There is a city, it shines like gold. Its foundations are precious stones, the same stones that adorned the guardian cherub in Ezekiel 28, the same stones associated with the priestly breastplate in Exodus. There is a river of the water of life, clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God. And on either side of the river, the tree of life. The tree of life. The same tree that stood in the center of the garden in Genesis 2. The same tree that God barred the exiles from reaching, lest they eat of it in their broken state and live forever in that brokenness. That tree is now open. Its leaves are for the healing of the nations. And this is the line that has stopped theologians and poets and ordinary readers in their tracks for 2,000 years. Revelation 22, verse 4, says that the servants of God will see his face. They will see his face in the Garden of Eden. After the fall, God hides his face. Moses asked to see God's glory, and God says, "No human being can see my face and live." The high priest who entered the most holy place once a year on the Day of Atonement, he entered with bells on his robe, so the people outside could hear him moving, so they would know he was still alive inside the presence of God. The whole story of the Bible is the story of that distance. The distance between the garden and the exile, between the face of God and the veil that hides it. And at the end, the veil is gone. The sword is gone. The cherubim are gone. Not because the holiness of God is lessened, but because the thing that made the holiness terrifying, the sin, the shame, the separation, has been dealt with fully, finally, at a cross, on a hill, outside a city, by a man who knelt in a garden the night before and chose surrender. That flaming sword that turns in every direction, the one I asked you to hold in your mind at the very beginning. Do you see it now? It was never meant to guard the garden forever. It was meant to guard it until the one came who could pass through it, the one who bore the fire on our behalf, the one whose death tore the veil in the temple from top to bottom, not from bottom to top, not by human hands, but from the top, as if something on the other side had been waiting to open it. The exile is ending. This is what the whole Bible is doing, not giving you rules to follow, not giving you history to memorize. The Bible is telling you one long story about a God who made a garden to live in with his people, who watched his people lose it, and who spent the next 4,000 years of human history arranging the return. Every altar in the wilderness, every priest in the temple, every sacrifice, every prayer, every prophet who stood on a rooftop and said something is coming, all of it pointed here. All of it was a door being built, slowly, across centuries, toward the moment when the garden would be opened again. And here is the first thing I want you to take with you. The longing you feel, the deep, unnamed ache for something more than what this world gives you, is not a character flaw. It is not ingratitude. It is the oldest human experience. You were made for the garden. You were made to walk with God in the evening and not be afraid. The longing is correct. You are homesick for a place your body has never been, but your soul has always known. And here's the second thing. The story is not over yet. The Garden of Revelation is not a metaphor for dying and going to heaven. The text says God himself comes to dwell with his people, not that his people are spirited away to live in the sky. The new creation is this world, made whole. The garden comes down. That is the direction of the story. Not escape upward, but renewal here. The garden comes to the city, and the city becomes the garden. And God walks among his people again, the way he walked in Eden. And the third thing, the one I want you to carry longest, you already have access to something the cherubim once guarded with fire. When Jesus died, the temple veil tore the inner sanctuary, the most holy place, the one room in all of creation where God's presence dwelt, behind a curtain so thick that no one person could lift it, was opened. Not as a symbol, not as a metaphor, as an event. The barrier came down. The presence of God became accessible, not to the high priest once a year with trembling hands and the sound of bells, but to you, right now, in whatever room you are sitting in whatever state you find yourself. The exile is not fully over. We still live between the garden lost and the garden coming. But the door has been cracked open. The sword has been passed through. And the voice that called out in Eden, "Where are you?" has been answered at last. Not with hiding, with a cross, with a garden tomb, with a morning that changed everything. The garden was never just a garden. It was always home. And the God who made it has been walking toward you ever since you left.